continuation with the series on economic sociology. In today's discussion, we have to discuss about distribution and its reach, where we will be discussing about gifts and return gifts. Now, before we start discussing gifts and return gifts, we know that distribution is one of the process in economics where the three processes are production, distribution and consumption. Now, much of the literature generally talks about production, where we kind of look into the ways in which labor is put into work and we generate certain product. One way of kind of understanding the market and the economy was also to compare traditional society with modern society. And one institution which became integral to the comparative understanding is market. Now, when we look into the market, much of socialized theories talk about market as a modern institution. When we go back to the understanding of distribution, that is how our goods that are produced reaches the market, or does it reach the consumer or the producers. So, there we need to kind of understand that traditional distribution was not so simple and it cannot be kind of simplified. So, here we are going to make reference to the work of Marcel Mauss, and his book is The Gift. We will be talking about the chapters introduction and chapter 1 to understand what Marcel Mauss wants to argue about the system of gift exchange in primitive society. So, to begin, Marcel Mauss, in his classical work, The Gift, Form and Reason for Exchange in Archaic Society, examined how contracts and exchanges worked in the so-called primitive or ancient societies. So, again we have discussed several times that these are the terms which are used to refer to pre-modern society: archaic, primitive, ancient, traditional. Now, how do we look into the system of exchange, or how did they kind of establish contract among the producer and the consumers? So, Marcel Mauss argues that in these societies, social things weren't separate from each other. Rather, everything was connected. Society reflected total social fact. Now, Marcel Mauss was impressed by Durkheim's study of social fact, where he considered the social fact as a reflection of the social phenomena. It was basically the idea that society is a whole and all the parts are connected to each other. So, in traditional or primitive society, this total social fact refers to the society where different parts of society like religion, law, moral and economy are connected to each other. So, in order to understand the economy, we have to understand the moral order, we have to understand the system of rules, regulation, religion, culture, and that is kind of considered as a more holistic study. Now, these things are also had artistic side and showed how the society was shaped. Now, when we look into distribution or we look into gift, another term which is quite common in anthropological and sociological literature is the term prestation. Now, what are prestation? Prestations are a set of phenomena which are in theory voluntary, disinterested and spontaneous, but in fact are obligatory and interested. So, when we look from say an outsider or a stranger and study the traditional society, to them the prestation or gift was kind of considered as voluntary. We on our own gave something, or we gave it spontaneously. But a deeper study of the system of exchange of these primitive society indicate that none of these exchanges are kind of voluntary. Rather, they are more obligatory. It's an obligation to return gift, or it's an obligation to gift way. And there's a certain hidden interest when people are exchanging gifts. So, we don't exchange gifts among strangers. So, it helps us also to understand the social structure, the kin networks, and that becomes central idea for the study of the institution of exchange. Certain gifts may seem like they are given freely without expecting anything in return, but actually they come with hidden rules. If we look around, if we need not necessarily go to the pre-modern and archaic society, even if we look around ourselves, there is a certain rule or certain normative pattern to whom are we giving gift, or what are we, even there is a kind of a monetary aspect in terms of what is the value of the gift that we are giving to someone. So here the meaning of the prestations implies that the people act like they are being generous. So giving gift would kind of appear being very generous, but in reality they are expected to give and receive in a certain way. These exchanges are based on duty and personal gain, not just kindness. So it's not for a layman it appears as generosity or it appears as kindness, but a sociological study of gift exchange as such that Marcel Mauss has done kind of refers that there is a certain pattern in which the exchange has taken place. It reflects the cultural norm, it reflects the not only the kind of relations and network, but also in terms of understanding the society as such. Therefore, before he starts studying the primitive society, Marcel Mauss raises certain important questions. Why do we need to kind of study gift? So it's important to examine the deeper rules behind this kind of exchange, which is part of how people share work in society. So exchange is not generosity, it's not kindness, it is connected to the world of work. When you are working, it's kind of integral that you take part in that exchange, and that is why we are kind of discussing it within the domain of economic process, that is distribution. However, a larger question or the main question is, why in earlier society does someone who gets a gift feel they must give something back? So you cannot stop by just taking it gift, you also have the obligation to return. So he is trying to understand why do they have the obligation to return the gift. The other question is, what power does the gift have that makes people return the favor? Marcel Mauss focuses on a type of exchange that looks like free and generous gift, but in reality it's something people are expected to give and return. So the whole idea is that you're receiving and you're giving back, and that is where we build a network of relationship. Even kind of in everyday modern society, networking is important, and therefore we see a lot of gift exchange even in the corporate sector, or even the business class is giving it to the client. So it's in a kind of establishing a relationship. So this receiving and giving back is kind of structured within the society. Marcel Mauss also raises some new questions. Some are about morality, like how even today laws about property are still connected to laws about people and relationship. Others are about the ideas behind exchange, like how the concept of personal gain or self-interest has always been part of trade and still is today. He also explores how the idea of personal gain, acting in one's interest, has always been a part of exchange. So it's not that the idea of profit comes in with capitalism and modern modes of production and distribution. Interest, profit has always been a part and parcel of human society. Now let us look into the main two objectives of Marcel Mauss' study. The first is to learn about how human exchanges worked in both the societies around us today and in those just before us. So there is no kind of differentiation in terms of the exchange. He was of opinion that we cannot differentiate or create two dichotomy in terms of the archaic society and the modern society. On one ground they are similar, in that is the modes of exchange and gift giving. The second objective is to describe how certain contracts and exchanges were done in those older society which had different system from ours. Yes, transformation has taken place and we do not necessarily exchange the product in the same manner that is doing, because with change in the production system, distribution has also changed, and therefore there are certain changes in the way in which people establish contract and distribute the products. Now, when we look into the whole system of distribution, today the market is the integral for the distribution of the product which is there. You need a market and you need sellers and buyers for the goods to be distributed. So, basically, do we then think that is markets or our market a modern institution? And that is the question that do we find markets even in the pre-modern society? So, some people are of opinion that these society didn't have real market. Now, these societies are the primitive and the archaic society. Marcel Mauss disagrees with this, and he is of opinion that markets are basic human activity and existed in every known society. In fact, market existed before there were merchants and before money looked like it does now. They were active even before the more formal system of contracts, sales, and capital that developed in ancient Semitic, Greek, and Roman culture. So, the whole idea is that market as an institution was present, but it was not given so much of significance because the social structures were, the collectivity was still very important. Now, we've tried to understand why we need to study gift exchange. If transformation has taken place and the exchange is not exactly the same as it was earlier, what is the advantage of studying? And here it is important to come back to the another objective was to look at the moral and economic sides of these systems. Marcel Mauss was opinion that the same moral and economic ideas found in early society still existed in modern society, even if they are harder to see. So, what is important is to understand that transformation is taking place, but what was there in the pre-modern society has not altogether disappeared. It's there, but it's kind of needs a more deeper integration or a more deeper understanding. These ideas form part of the foundation of social life. That's why studying them can help understand and reflect on some of the moral issues faced today, especially during times of economic crisis. We know that economic crisis has become kind of even very complex. So, going back to understand how people distributed goods or how people exchange gifts, received and gifts will help us to understand these problems of modern society. Now, what is the methodology used? The method was based on careful comparison of specific reason. Now, early anthropologists basically used comparative method for understanding the social institutions, and this study was also a comparative study of a number of society, Polynesia, Melanesia, northwest coast of North America, and on well documented cultural system. The main interest was on language and meaning, and therefore study only societies where understanding their thoughts through reliable records and language study is feasible. Each case study was chosen because it helped explain the bigger system analyzed, and each one presented where it makes the most sense. So, we have looked into the significance of the study, the methodology. Now, let us understand the core argument of the work. Now, prestation, gift, potlatch are all terms referring to distribution or gift exchange. So, again, when we compare the pre-modern society to modern society, much of the understanding was that there is a transition from a natural economy to a market-based economy. Now, here the author argues that there is nothing called a natural economy, not even in the ancient time and not even modern, say, so-called primitive society. A closer look at the Polynesian society reflects that exchange are far from simple or natural. A lot of anthropologists have kind of given this argument that societies in Polynesia and Melanesia have a natural economy. However, this is a kind of a counter argument that it was more complex than it kind of appeared. In the past, exchange wasn't just individual trading good in a marketplace. Instead, it was groups like tribes, clans, or families that made deals and took on obligations. So I just said that the collectivity was very significant, the social structure was important. Now we see individual as trader and purchase, sellers and buyers in the market. Earlier it was a community that was involved. So it was either the tribe or a larger group, the clan, families, which were engaged in establishing a contract and exchange. When contracts were made, the people involved represented social groups, not just themselves. Chiefs often acted on behalf of their group in these exchanges. Also, what they exchanged were just not objects or money. They traded gifts of many kinds: hospitality, ceremonies, help in war, women in marriage, children, dances, and feasts. In these early systems, market and wealth exchange was just one part of much bigger and long lasting agreement between groups. Even though giving and returning gifts seemed voluntary, they were actually strict obligations. And if people did not follow them, the punishment could be private or open conflict. Now, this punishment was also not individual. So, it was kind of the punishment would be to the entire tribe or the entire family, and the other consequence of not returning the gift would be conflict between two groups. And that is why gift return of the gift was mandatory and adhered by certain rules. This system is especially clear in certain tribal alliances like those between the Fatris. The Fatris are the subgroup between a tribe in Australia and North America. The two sides of the tribe had to work together for all of this to function. Now, we will try to understand a system of gift exchange which is referred in anthropological literature as potlatch. The Tlingit and the Haida people of northwest coast gave a good example of this when they say show respect to each other. So, even when we think about exchange, we just think about money and material thing. Here even respect and honor is being exchanged. This system shows up in special form that more developed and less common. It's called the potlatch, a term which used following American scholars. The word potlatch comes from the Chinook language and was later adopted by both indigenous people and white settlers from Vancouver to Alaska. Originally, it meant to feed or to consume. The Tlingit and the Haida are the community that live on the island coastline and inland areas between the Pacific and the Rockies. They are known for their wealth and spend their winters in long festivals filled with feast, market, and ceremonies that also serve as important tribal gathering. During these tribal gatherings, the tribe organized themselves into hierarchies such as fraternities and secret societies. They perform marriage, initiation, spiritual rituals, and worship of gods, totem, and ancestor. All of this is surrounded by ritual and gift giving, which help determine political rank at different levels from families to entire tribal nations. What stands out most about these tribes, though, is the intense spirit of competition and rivalry that runs through all these activities. In these societies, people aren't afraid to challenge other chief or nobleman, even if they are their relatives. They may even go as far as destroying their own wealth in grand display just to outshine a rival. So, we have seen that how integral the system of exchange is. It's not just going and buying something or selling something. It is kind of connected to the larger social structures of the society. Now, besides potluck, here the references all to other forms of exchanges and more intermediate forms of exchange that fall somewhere between the extreme rivalry of potluck style giving and more balanced exchange. In these cases, people still compete, but in a more moderate way, like when people try to outdo each other with ceremonial gift, parties, or wedding invitations. For example, in France, people often try to match or exceed each other in housing events. Now, there is a lot of competition even in the modern society where we try to spend more than required in order to just try to show off that yes, we can also be a consumer of pricey things. Now, we've tried to understand that there is an exchange at a collective level. Now, what is the idea behind the exchange system? According to Marcel Mauss, there are many important ideas behind the exchange system. But the most important one is the spiritual and moral rule that says you must give something back when you receive a gift. This obligation to return a gift is especially clear in Polynesian society. Marcel collected data from Polynesian society to see exactly what force or belief made people repay gift and honor these kinds of contract. So, the earlier research on how contractual gift systems spread across cultures showed that true potlatch system did not exist in Polynesia. The closest was system of total prestation, that is long-term agreement between clans involving shared people, rituals and responsibilities. For example, in Samao, there is a well-known tradition where chief exchanged decorated mats during marriages. But this did not show any sign of being a more complex system like the potlatch. Now, when we look into the Samao example, the key features of potlatch, that is rivalry, destruction of wealth and conflict, is missing, even though they did appear in Melanesia. In Samao, the system of contractual gift giving isn't limited to marriage. It applies to events like childbirth, circumcision, illness, gift coming of age, funeral and even trade. Although Samao doesn't have a full potlatch system, it does include the two of its key elements. In Samao, the gift given at childbirths are like part of a long-term obligatory system. People don't return these gifts voluntarily. They are expected because of social rules and rights. In this culture, cross-cousin marriage is common, and it is also normal for a man to give his child to his sister and her husband to raise. The sister's husband, the child's maternal uncle, calls the child a tonga, meaning feminine property. The honor and prestige. So, we see that different kinds of exchanges are taking place, which is there could be an exchange of a certain individual honor, prestige. Now, Marcel Mauss talks about the force or the principle that forces people to return back the gift, that the obligation to return. And here he says that there is a lot of honor and prestige, which is termed as mana, that comes from giving and displaying wealth. The absolute obligation to return gift or risk losing one's mana, authority and social standing. So, the idea is that if you don't give gifts or you don't return gift, that your honor and prestige would decline. So, a missionary named Turner described birth ceremonies where families gave and received oloa, that is masculine goods, and tonga, which is feminine goods. Even though parents ended up with no extra wealth afterward, they felt deep pride and honor seeing the large piles of gift gathered in their name. This child then becomes a pathway through which gifts and wealth flow from the parents to the maternal family. At the same time, to the biological parents, the child is a source of oloa or a foreign, that is masculine property, coming from the family who raises them. So, in a way, the exchange of child creates an ongoing system of gift and wealth flow between families. The child lives with the maternal uncle and thus has the right to his property. So, when we try to look into the system of exchange, we see that when Marcel Mauss is studying the system of exchange, he is not just talking about how you go to the market, buy a good and or how do you produce and sell it in the market. There are different ways in which we are exchanging our honor, our prestige, and the normative pattern is that there is a kind of invisible force which is responsible for returning, and that is the idea that if you don't return, then your honor and prestige will decline. So, here when we look into the exchange, it includes not just material things, but also spiritual and symbolic wealth, and what might also be called magical property. The idea is that the value isn't only economic, but also spiritual and cultural. So, when we come to the conclusion, we see that in this system, the economical transaction does not play the central role, but is mere an aspect of the greater and enduring contract. The most important point is that these giving, which are given as gifts, are obligatory and encloses the danger of war, private or public. So, when we read Marcel Mauss The Gift, we will be able to understand that the tradition and the modern are not necessarily opposed to each other, but rather there is a continuum, there is a flow from which, and many of our system of exchange, gifts giving, whether we are giving on birthday or marriages, are reflecting the same normative cultural pattern that existed in the pre-modern or archaic society. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.